The meeting. Okay, I'm just going to ask Sandra if there's any apologies.
No, received no apologies today.
Everybody's here or online. Okay. So welcome again, everybody. Thank you for the respectful and construction discussion we had yesterday. I'm hoping we can continue in that spirit. As I've said, we are not in a rush, but we do need to get through this. I do wish to remind us all that we're here for the benefit of all the citizens of our great city, all of Aucklanders. So please keep a regional perspective. This isn't an auction, and it requires everyone to listen to their colleagues and make some compromises, like I have done in my amendment yesterday. Please keep in mind the big picture and the challenges we are facing. Yesterday, we were reminded by staff and our independently chaired Audit and Risk Committee that there are around $3 billion worth of unfunded problems just around the corner. So today we need to be responsible and sustainable. We heard a lot yesterday about hopes for the long-term plan. I want us to be cautious about putting our problems today off until tomorrow. The long-term plan is an important document and we're going to have a lot to do to put it together, but it can't fix everything. And it can't be characterised by wishful thinking. We do need to start fixing things today. Councillor Foley has put forward an amendment which is an alternative, which removes the debt reduction or asset sales lever completely and puts up debt. We've all had a chance to consider that overnight, and indeed so have commentators in the media. Where we got to last night is that Councillor Foley's motion had been moved and seconded, and she has started her speech in the debate and still has 9 minutes and 30 seconds to go. Once she has finished, we'll move to questions on the amendments. Thank you. So I shall hand it to you, Councillor Foley. Hand it back to you.
Your Worship, can I ask a question of process, please? I mean, I don't want to invoke standing orders, which is around how to run the meeting, but I just want to ask a question on process in regards to today around the amendments that have been pushed forward. My question of process is the amendments, there's Councillor Foley plus mine that has been seconded. I know that there have been other amendments put in. So how, well, there have been, sorry, and so I want to know what process they will be in, whether, from my perspective, Councillor Dalton has an alternative, Councillor Walker has an alternative, and possibly Councillor Darby. So I want to have a look at the process as to which ones of those amendments will be dealt with, depending on what happens with this particular amendment. So that's the question on the process. Is it Councillor Lotus, which is going first, and then is it Councillor Dalton's, and then Councillor Walker's, and then Councillor Darby's? Thank you, Your Worship.
Righto, we have received Councillor Foley's one and we had started into the actions responding to that, which is where I intend to keep following up to. We had yesterday received an amendment from Councillor Walker, seconded by Councillor Waston, and apparently overnight we have received a third one from Councillor Darby, not seconded, and there is a fourth one apparently here from Councillor Dalton, also not seconded. So they will just proceed as in the normal way that we go through a meeting. I'm not intending to do anything unusual in the order that they've been received and seconded. And at the moment we are underway with Councillor Foley's amendment, and you have 9 minutes and 30 seconds left to go.
Point of clarification, Chair, are we debating what is on the table? I'm a bit confused of what's going on here.
Waiting for Councillor Philly to continue in 9 minutes and 50 seconds, and I'm going to knock off 3 if you don't use them.
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm just waiting because there's a whole lot of stuff going on. I'm just...
Well, the thing is that you are the current speaker to an amendment, and we have
Okay.
resumed the
All
meeting,
right. No,
so I'm
that's okay.
chewing through your time. So
Kia ora.
if there are
Thank
other
you.
things happening, that's fine, but
Thank
under the
you, Your
standing
Worship.
orders, you are speaking to your amendment.
Kia ora, thank you. Just yesterday, I thought that we were starting with questions, but that's fine. All right.
You can forgo that, but normally the proposer has 10 minutes to speak to their amendment. That's
Yes.
the rules.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Then we go to questions. I,
Kia ora. Yeah.
at your request, I'm closely following standard rules, okay?
All right. Thank you. Kia ora. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, rau rangatira mā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Mā lo lava le soifua maua, ma le langi mama. Warm tāmaki makaurau greetings to you all, Your Worship, and to all of our learned colleagues around this table. And I do say that with the greatest of respect for yourself, Your Worship, and for all of our elected members around this table. I recognise, Your Worship, that this has been a very difficult time for all of us. But I do want to mihi to each and every one of you. I want to recognise your mana, and I recognise that each of you sits here with a mandate from your communities and as leaders for your communities. You represent the different voices and the different aspirations of our diverse communities. And of course, because of that, we have different views. And I hope that as a result of this process, although we have had different discussions, robust discussions and disagreements, I hope that at the end of this process that we will all still remain colleagues, and that any relationships and friendships that may have been frayed along the way will be healed by the end of this process. Thank you. Kia ora. Your Worship, I'll go now to my amendment that everyone has had an opportunity to have a look at, and I'll point out those key differences between your final proposal that we received yesterday afternoon and the alternative that's being presented for you. And Your Worship, it is an alternative and it is a balanced budget. Finance have had a look, they've checked the numbers, and it does balance. And that's the key for us here today. This alternative proposes a different way forward. It gives for us a way to keep our shares for the people of Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, to keep our most significant asset that we currently have. It also allows for us to put back some of the cuts that you have proposed in your original proposal, and even more cuts than you proposed in your most current proposal as well. It puts back, and I'm mindful of that, Your Worship, because we've heard from others around the table yesterday that for some people that was the key. It was the cuts to our communities that they were most concerned about, which is why many people said and voiced yesterday that they would rather sell our shares than see those cuts continue. And so, Your Worship, this alternative I present to you does allow for us to return all of the funding to our local boards, which have been crucial for all of us, especially during the flood response and especially during our cyclone that we had recently. We saw, especially in the west, we saw out in the south, how many of our community groups who are funded by our local boards, who are funded through some of the initiatives that they receive from those grants, they stood in that gap when we ourselves failed to stand in that gap for our vulnerable communities during the January floods. And so I'm very pleased, Your Worship, that this alternative puts back all of the funding for our local boards. I'm pleased also, Your Worship, that it reinstates the $1 million to our ECEs. We've heard the strong cry from our parents and our families of our kauri kids. It does, though, and I have reached out to some of our parents to tell them that it is really just to say, let's have a pause, let's work with our staff, Let's work with our local boards going forward and consider a local approach, a local approach rather than a regional approach to our Kauri kids going forward. But reinstating that $1 million does allow for that time to happen. It allows them to continue operating as they do currently and gives us that time to have that local approach. But it also takes away from the boards that extra burden of trying to do that with the existing funding that they have, as you've proposed in your proposal. And I do, I totally respect the work that's been done in the background by others, including Councillor Ferry, to achieve that. But I'm mindful of that extra burden on the local boards. And so I'm proud that our alternative budget does allow for that ECE funding to be returned. Your Worship, the rates we have kept as low as possible. Many around this table have said that they did not want rates to go into double digits. I am more comfortable with them going into double digits, as you know, as I've said in the past. But because I've spoken to many others around the table and in this room, and there was a strong desire to keep the rates as low as possible. And I'm also mindful of my local boards, the Otara Papatoi local board and the Mangele o Tahuhu local board, who have said to me, they've given me a mandate and given Councillor Alpha mandate to increase rates and to increase our debt funding in order to keep the shares. But they did impress upon me that if possible, please put it more on the short-term debt than on the rates. And that's reflected in the alternative that we have here. So we've kept rates at 9.9%, mitigated to 6.8, or rounded down to 6.7, as the staff have said, in order to achieve that. The trade-off, of course, is the short-term debt. And we've put that to the maximum amount that staff advised previously of $140 million. However, Your Worship, as others I'm sure will comment on during the debate, we understand that the dividend from the airports has not been factored in because there is an assumption that the dividend would not be received because we were going to sell the airport shares. And so there is a great expectation from many around the room that that $140 million in debt will be mitigated by that dividend. If that's not correct, then that's fine, and we will find that out later on today. But I'm comfortable with putting on that debt to the maximum of $140 million in order to keep the cuts as low as we've proposed, as well as keeping the rates down to below 10%. So, Your Worship, that's the alternative budget that's been proposed. I'm asking members around the room to consider it. I'm sure you've had all night to consider it. And I'm appealing to, as you said, Your Worship, you listened yesterday, and I also listened yesterday and over the last 6 months. And we've heard a strong desire to keep the shares from many, a strong desire to keep the rates down as low as possible, but recognising that increasing the rates to 9.9 for general rates and to 6.7 or 6.8, and that mitigated figure is still a big increase compared to past terms. So I recognise that. And keeping the debt to a reasonable level of $140 million that we can afford. Your Worship, I do want to speak now about why some of these things have been proposed as an alternative to your budget. I've said to you previously that I personally don't mind rates going up a little bit further, but like I said, I'm mindful of the opinions of others, and I'm very mindful of the struggle that our families are going through with the cost of living. But for me, Your Worship, it has been about the sale of the airport shares. And as we've seen over recent weeks, really that's what it's come down to. It's about the sale of the airport shares. We heard yesterday, and we've heard many times, that the asset, the airport shares, although they are defined as a strategic asset in law by Parliament, and although they are a strategic asset for our city and probably for our country as the biggest airport in the country, they are not a strategic asset for us as Auckland Council. Your Worship, I accept that. I accept that we have not thought about it strategically. We have not had a strategic a strategic approach to the shares, but that's our fault. That's the fault of this governing body and of past governing bodies. We have not had an investment strategy in place for some time, and that's our failing. We failed the people of Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, because of that. But it doesn't mean that we have to do that forever. And it doesn't mean that that's a good reason to get rid of the biggest asset that we currently own, or to sell off that final last piece that belongs in public ownership, the 18% that still remains in public ownership. That 18% belongs to the people of Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, inherited from the people of Manukau City and Auckland City. It has brought in $400 million in dividends. Oh, I thought I got 10 minutes. Is that 10 minutes? Really? I
Your Worship,
apologise.
I'd like to move an extension of time.
Second that.
Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship. I apologise for that. I will wrap it up. As I said, it is a strategic asset. We should think of it as a strategic asset, and going forward, I would hope that through the long-term plan and going forward, we will begin to have an investment approach, a strategic approach to looking at this asset. Your Worship, I said yesterday that I accept that if we have underperforming assets, then we should look at selling them. But this is not an underperforming asset. Yesterday, somebody said that this asset costs us more to keep it than it returns. That's true of every single asset we own, if you apply that same logic. Show me an asset that we own that returns us more than it costs to hold it, an opportunity cost or otherwise. Does that mean that we should sell this town hall? Does that mean that we should sell all the parks and reserves that we have? Of course not. So please, let's not be rash. Let's not give away our biggest asset that we own. Let's consider it in a much more comprehensive way. Let's consider this asset along every other asset that we own. Let's have a strategic approach going forward, and let's look at all of our investments going forward as well. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, members of the governing body. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions of this? Who? Oh, Councillor Hills. I'm sorry, I missed you there.
Kia ora, Mayor.
Councillor.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Foley. I guess my question to finance is,
Councillor Hills, I'm sorry, but I did raise this as a point of order yesterday, Mr. Mayor, and I just really appreciate clarification because it goes to what's happened now. I'm trying to find in the standing orders where a mover of an amendment is opened up to questions, if that's what's happening here. I can't find it.
Kia ora, Councillor. I'm not asking of Councillor Foley.
I just want to clarify that there may be other people that are doing that, Councillor Hills, okay?
Asking questions and the staff are available to respond to them, okay? Is that all right?
So,
Yep.
that's fine.
Just questions.
Yep.
You toss a question in and an answer will arrive somewhere. Thank you very much. I have...
Kia ora, Mayor. Thank you. I guess I just need the finance advice on what this means. I guess when you're putting the debt up to 160 and the rates stay at 6.78, I just need to know what the effect on next year's budget will be with the whole, and or what the rates component would be to cover.
I'll just get the relevant staff to come to the table. Is that all right?
Thank you.
Mr. Guts will bring his staff, who are the experts on this, and they'll tell us. So your question is, what does this mean to next year's rates? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes, if we're putting the 60 million to debt instead of rates or shares, what does that mean for the gap or the rates next year?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hills. A couple of points from me. Yesterday, the investment policy came up, and it came up again today. I'd refer people to the Treasury Management Policy on our website. It's a requirement of the Local Government Act that we have an investment policy, and it is there. I googled it before. With respect to debt and the use of it, I think the staff advice is pretty clear. Staff advice, page 53 of item 9 on the agenda, has paragraphs 50 to 57 on debt. It's worth reiterating this space. The Council could choose to fund a higher level of capital expenditure from borrowings while remaining within current policy settings around ensuring a balanced budget and moving to full funding of depreciation by 2028. And you've heard me reiterate that point a number of times. Current policy settings would allow for this up to 140 million for 23-24, but it's important to note that the capacity in future financial years is less. So I am getting to the answer to the question because that is a key point in moving to that. This means that using debt to the full extent of the policy settings would require replacement mitigations to be found in subsequent years, adding to the budget challenge for those years and putting upwards pressure on future rates increases. So when we're doing a calculation in this space, the lever that is moving is rates. It's not the only lever that's available. We know we have other levers, but that is the one in which we can best understand the implication for mitigations in future years. A key consideration for this lever, being debt, is that it does not address the ongoing operating cost challenge, but merely postpones its mitigation. Any additional borrowing will also increase the level of interest cost faced by the Council in future years. The use of debt to address an ongoing operating challenge may also reduce credibility with funding partners, credit rating agencies, who currently place high reliance on a high-quality financial management and commitment to financial prudence and sustainability. Additional council borrowing also reduces the headroom available, and there's more in that paragraph on that, particularly around making space for water program, additional costs for CRL, and the items I talked to yesterday. For these reasons, the Council took a view in the consultation document that debt should be used sparingly and only as a last resort to address the operating budget gap. It proposed a modest increase of debt by up to 75 million. The consultation document did note, however, that using debt by up to 140 million may need to be considered if other levers were not used to the extent proposed or further financial challenges emerge. And while not a sustainable option to address ongoing cost pressures, additional borrowing may be an appropriate mitigation where costs are short-term or temporary. This could include the one-off recovery and response costs associated with the 2023 storm events. So apologies for reading that for those of you who are well familiar with it, but it does set up the required context for answering the question that Councillor Hills has placed through you. So our understanding of the amendment and as it currently applies, is that compared to the initial proposal, it would increase next year's rates by (2.3%), and compared to the updated proposal, slightly under 3%. Now, that may not sound like a big amount, or it might. However, the absolute overall average general rates increase that we would be looking at for 24-25 before mitigations would then be in the range of 13.2%. So if we pulled that back to the criteria that we have discussed earlier, we would challenge the fit of some of those criteria, particularly around credible, sustainable, affordable and implementable. When we talk about affordable, we talk about avoiding unacceptable shocks for ratepayers, both now and in the future. So through you, Your Worship, that's the impact.
So through you, Mayor, so it's 13, so if we pass this amendment, it would take us to 13.2% next year, but are you saying that's without adding the targeted rates back? So with the targeted rates,
I know that's with the targeted rates.
with the targeted rates increased back to, which the Mayor has said would be in his proposal, what does that take the rate rise to next year?
So as the starting point for year one of the LTP, yes, 13.2, the general rates. If the long-term differential strategy starts again and the two targeted rates both start up again, for residential ratepayers, that would be an average total rates increase of 15%, and for business ratepayers, a total average rates increase of 13.9.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question? 15%. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two questions to Finance. and this is for all the amendments that we may or may not receive today, are they costed by finance to make sure that they add up?
Yes, the amendments that we've received, we've run them through our models to ensure that they produce balance.
Thank you, that's great. My second and final question, this amendment actually includes 160 million of debt, so that's 20 more than we have consulted on. Are we able to do that? This might be a legal question or a
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I believe so. The last paragraph that I talked to there was around the recovery and response costs associated with the 2023 storm events of around 20 million. So that 20 million would be on top of the 140 to allow for 160 to fit within the framework.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Lee, please.
I take it, even at this stage, the finance officers have not factored in the dividend from Auckland International Airport due in October, which is, I understand at this stage, 42 million, nor is there much awareness of the significant amount of money due in next year, I believe, from the renewal of the West Haven Marina berth licences, and also I will leave it at that. It's still not there, is it, the 42 million?
No, the modelling that we've done, the proposal put forward by Councillor Foley does include the projected dividend received from Auckland Airport for next year.
If it is included, that would mean the 140 million borrowing could actually come down by that amount.
No, that's baked in and treated as operating revenue. So that dividend is part of that calculation.
And with respect to the marina issue, we understand, having checked with Ikipanuku who manage these aspects, that those berths are becoming available 26 and 29, so not within the immediate short term.
Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, thank you. Officers, you mentioned that it would go up by 2% or 3% the rates. Can you give us in real dollar terms, what is a 2% rate rise per week for the average householder? Usually Andrew Duncan's very good at giving us those numbers if he's in the room.
Yes, I'll wait for the calculation on that.
Is this the calculation on 3% or the 15%? I mean, it was a bit confusing what you said. I understood it was 15%. But
the increase for next year for the year coming, of 9.9% increase top line, 6.7 for residential. That would be a $222 annual increase for the average residential property. So that's $4.27 a week.
Per week, $4.27.
For the average.
For the average household, okay. All right. And then for the following year, you said it went up and, you didn't, okay. So the current Mayor's proposal already puts the rates at 11%. That's a starting point, which is already 2% more or 1.1% more than our starting point, the alternative starting point. What does that go up to next year, or does it go down next year?
So sorry, just to your other question there about the second year.
Oh yes,
under
sorry.
your one, so that 15% for residential would be $10.17 a week, okay. $529 a year. Under the Mayor's updated proposal, so 11% in the first year, 7.7, that's $253. So that's just under $5 a week.
Yep.
And for the second year, the average rates increase starting point under the Mayor's proposal is 10.4, which is 12.6% for the residential once you add back in those.
12.6%, okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Kia ora.
So Newman, please.
The amendment proposes the short-term debt would be used to cover the operating, the OPEX costs for next year. Can you confirm that that in effect is taking funding that would otherwise be used to fund the depreciation of our assets, our renewals program?
Yes, that would be broadly correct. The rationale for the 140 is that we are able to still meet our timeline to fully funding depreciation by 2028 and the commitment we have for this year by funding less of that depreciation, but the consequence of that is exactly as you have described.
Councillor Baker, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. So just so you've got it very, very clear, if we borrow the 160 and it's really just to enable us to reap, I guess, the benefit of a possible $40 million return, because as Councillor Foley says, it's all about the sale of the shares. That's what's driving her. And so to borrow the extra 60 on top of the 100 that's in the proposal, it's to, that would just give us a possible $40 million return from those shares.
That's correct. So the $60 million of additional debt is instead of the net $60 million from selling the shares.
Thank you. So just following on from a depreciation question of Councillor Newman, is there any work being done, or does our pushing out of our fully funding of depreciation, is there any work being done on what that actually means for the state of the assets? Most of those assets under the, I guess, the governance of local boards. Is there any work being done to show what that pushing out of depreciation is meaning for the underlying, I guess, condition of the assets that our communities use? Because I know what's going on in Franklin, where we're having to sell a hall because we cannot afford to fix it. So is that work being done, and what will be the impact, I guess, as we push out depreciation fully funding?
I need to be crisp that we are not pushing out the 2028 date for fully funding of depreciation. That is why there is a bounce back required next year in those rates figures to ensure that we are funding the amount of depreciation that we've committed to next year. So there is no impact on that. The difference here is whether we fund the depreciation through CapEx or debt, through the operating surplus or through debt. The degree to which the assets are managed, repaired, renewed is part of the asset management plans, part of the long-term plans, part of operational decisions.
Thank you. And two more, Your Worship. So if we accept the amendment, what is the exact additional interest cost that we would be facing for this year? Exactly what is it we would be paying in interest on top of the Mayor's proposal?
Sorry, compared with the Mayor's updated proposal? So there's the addition, you don't have the $45 million savings from selling the airport shares, plus the additional $60 million would give you about $3 million for a full year, so maybe half of that over the course of the year.
Cool. And so you just mentioned previously the impact on our, I guess, our credit rating and our credibility and amongst the financial markets. Can you sort of explain to us what the implications are if we drop our credit rating and we are seen as a less, I guess, credible customer when borrowing money if we go down this line of using debt to fund our operational costs?
Yeah, I can talk to those risks in generalities. It's obviously not a decision that we make. It's in others' hands, and they look at many factors when they're making their assessments. If there was an impact on our credit rating, we've assessed that previously and provided advice that it could be a 0.1 impact for debt. on our current debt holding. That's 12, 15 maybe million and upwards, depending on hedging and how that works through. But it also, I think, goes to reputation, credibility, and the how current investors would view us as well, given they took on the bonds with a certain expectation around our credit worthiness.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and certainly refreshing to see the scrutiny on this level of debt. That would have been nice if that had been around in years gone by, but certainly nice to see the change of approach here. My question is a very quick one, and it goes to a key phrase in respect of the projections for next year. I'm trying to get through this year, but and that goes to the phrase I think the Chief Financial Officer said, that's assumed without mitigation, without any sort of mitigation that may come up over the course of the next year, isn't it?
I do believe that is what I said, Councillor.
Great. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Simpson, please.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Baker asked some of my questions, so I might just put them maybe a different way. So, just in real clear language, and I'm, yes, I know. I was just trying to. I was watching my words, Your Worship. It's always a good idea to watch what you say. So maybe I'll ask you, as well as the operating gap next year, what does this do to our debt headroom without paying off the $1 billion that the Mayor has put in his version 3?
So the debt headroom without a sell down is the debt to revenue ratio will be 230%. With the partial sell down, it was 230%.
So that's partial without anything.
Oh, sorry, it's without, the partial is 230. This one would have a 250, so an extra 20%. It reduces your debt to revenue headroom by 20%.
Right.
And to try non-accountant speak, obviously without the $1 billion being sold down, debt would be $1 billion higher.
Yeah.
So that's probably the key differential. There's some movement around the increase in that short-term debt, but that would be the key reduction in the headroom in dollar terms.
$1 billion high, that's right. Now, this is a bit of a tough one, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but in your professional opinion, would this be a prudent budget for us to pass this year? No, I'm just asking.
We're getting into debate via management. That's not appropriate.
That's a question.
It's a rhetorical question.
Well, I've heard a few
It's
around
not the first time we don't always accept professional
It is a
advice.
question, and they can choose to answer it or not answer it. And you can choose to put your fingers over the ears if you don't want to hear it.
I believe I've talked to that somewhat in the staff advice where we talk about the use of debt to address an ongoing operating challenge may reduce credibility with funding partners and credit rating agencies who currently place high reliance on our high quality financial management and commitment to financial prudence and sustainability. So, reading between the lines on that is as close as I can get to answering that question. But I would refer you back also to the 4 criteria that we talked about yesterday and frames up the consultation document: credible, sustainable, affordable and implementable, and the need to be cognizant of the impact, not just current but future as well.
Thank you. And I was going to talk to you about the credit rating agency because I think it's important that we, through even the toughest of times, we've always kept our high credit rating. But if we were to pass a budget that actually challenged that, realising it's not your decision, what happens if we lose just 1 point in our, what is the extra cost for us when we start to go down against the current high credit rating that we currently have? In other words, what's the cost to us?
Yeah, John Bishop is about to leap up, the group treasurer, and provide a quite precise answer on this. That will expand on the point one I mentioned earlier.
Thinking through you, Chair. So look, a one-notch downgrade in rating would add between about 10 and 15 basis points to the cost of our debt. So on debt of 12 billion, that's between about 12 to 18 million dollars per annum.
Extra.
Extra.
Right, thank you. Okay, so, and then just finally, so this amendment puts our debt up to 250% debt to revenue, right? Which is the highest we've ever gone.
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure it's the highest we've ever gone. The real problem with adding more debt is not so much our debt capacity, it's the fact that we're not solving the operating gap in the most prudent and probably sensible manner. So rating agencies would look at us and say, you're relying on debt to fund an operating gap where you should be reliant on revenues or reducing costs.
Thank you for that answer. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Councillor Watson asked about mitigations. So my understanding is that the mitigations that we've got in place for this year is the pausing of the long-term differential strategy and the changes to those two targeted rates. Are those the only mitigation options for this year or for next year? Are there other mitigation options that we are using now?
I think the mitigations are really the levers that we have and that we've talked to that exist this year and next year. Rates, debt, OPEX, asset sales being the four key cogs.
I think I'm specifically asking about, we've talked about mitigated and unmitigated for the rates increase number. So specifically on that.
So looking at the difference between the general rates increase and the total rates paid by a different group of ratepayers, those are the key ones that we identified this year. In any year, councillors have opportunities to look at all targeted rates and how they can be applied and other items of rating policy. But those are the ones that were identified at this stage.
Yep, that's correct. So just to clarify, the mitigations we're talking about are the reducing the water quality and natural environment targeted rate for 1 year and using the money that's been collected through reserves, and the other one is pausing the business differential policy adjustment for 1 year. So those are two short-term measures that reduce the impact, mitigate the impact for residential households for 1 year. And the key point to note with those things is they are only a 1 year thing, they reverse and create more pressure on rates the following year. We haven't considered any other targeted rate mitigations or changes through this annual budget.
Thank you. So if there were to be mitigations applied next year, then we're potentially repeating what we've done this year. Is that correct?
For the water quality and natural environment target rates, if you weren't to sort of reinstate those, put them back to where they were, catch up, you would be raising less money for those programs. So that would be LTP decision about how much money you're collecting and what you're doing with it. So that's a whole other different discussion.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, so you've given us a figure for next year based on this amendment that would be around 15%. If we were to go with the Mayor's proposal on debt, but rates at 12.7%, which I understand would be sufficient to cover the OPEX hole without selling the shares, what would rates look like next year? What I'm trying to understand is if we put rates up a bit more this year, do we need a lower rates increase than the 15 next year? That's what I'm trying to sort of trade off in my considerations.
Yes, that's correct. We don't have the calculator in front of us set up to do that right on the fly, but absolutely, if you run that through the spreadsheet calculator, that's exactly what it does. If you were to put rates up this year rather than use debt, it would help alleviate the problem for the following year.
Okay, so I guess for members, there's a consideration there of 15% next year for a large amount of debt against advice this year, or a higher rates increase this year with a lower rates increase next year. Thank you.
Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. I've got a question, first of all, about financial prudence. And you point out the issue of solving the operational gap. Is it not the case that over successive years we have not acted financially prudently and our expenditure has been way out of whack, far more than our revenue? And by that I mean putting aside rate increases to cover significant increases in expenditure. And in particular between 2019 and the 23 projection, increases of well over in excess of inflation cumulatively. So if we're talking about financial prudence, how is it we've been able to act so imprudently up until now?
No, is my answer to that. And I'll expand on that answer. We're audited on an annual basis. We're transparent in our information. Our budgets and long-term plans are approved by governing body, and we tend to meet them. The other aspect which gives us good comfort around our financial prudence is actually our credit ratings with Standard & Poor's and Moody's, who do an exhaustive search of that. So that's how I would suggest that we are financially prudent, and I'd leave it there.
Is it not the case that over that period 2019 through to the 2023 projection, that across major parts of the group, including the CCOs, we have had increases in expenditure of 40 to 50% and sometimes more above cumulative inflation over those years? Is that the case? And I'm sure Mr. Williamson to the right of me could answer that if there's an issue.
Through you, Your Worship, I'm not sure that this is a topic relating to the amendment which I came up here to provide financial advice on.
I think that's probably true.
My only reason for addressing this issue goes to this matter of financial prudence that appears to be bandied around against a background of absolute financial imprudence. The other question I've got just goes to the next year, which is the LTP. And essentially I'm mindful that LTP, and Councillor Fletcher has spoken to this, and so has the Mayor, will be directed by the Mayor and Council. And is it not the case that the Mayor has signalled any number of mitigations that may include savings, and they could be cuts, and that does not mean cuts to services, enhances in productivity that Councillor Turner has reinforced on an ongoing basis, and I would suggest are widespread across the entire organisation, the possible enhancement of government funding for any number of issues where Aucklanders are subsidising expenses that are better borne by the government, development contributions, and a number of other mitigations. So is it not the case, particularly given that the Mayor has indicated that the next LTP will be built from a zero base, that we could well achieve significant savings and an absolute turnaround of this organisation, which is desperately required? Is that not an accurate portrayal?
The LTP process is indeed led by the Mayor, and I'm sure it will be fully engaged with, and we will support it as it goes forward.
So what follows is that the mitigations that you are talking about and the projections are essentially based around business as usual. Is that the case?
I was, through you, Your Worship, I was very clear that I had done this without other mitigations for exactly this reason, that the LTP will set that trend. It is the first year of the LTP. So, yes, it is a process led by the Mayor and supported by staff.
And I have a further question, and it goes to the dividends and the advice that we've received from Auckland Airport and also officers that there's a projected dividend at this point, 19 million, I think, in September, October this year, 23 million in March, April. I'm mindful also that the performance of the airport is enhancing significantly, and it could well be that those projections are conservative. Is it not desirable for us to actually achieve those dividends? Because in the short term, they supply a significant amount of operational funding as compared to debt funding. And that enhances both our revenue, our capacity to raise debt, and in the short term, our ability to cover off our operational expenses. Thank you.
I believe we've discussed this item already, with the difference between the holding cost being around 100 million and the dividends being well less of that. The other aspect with respect to dividend income is the expectation of that is factored into share price.
I just want to remind people that we're wandering off into the LTP, and I know that's going to be a wonderful thing and characterised by lots of blue sky thinking and wishful thinking, but we are debating Councillor Fooley's amendment rather than the LTP, and which I will hope to lead, but I will hope to lead it through sensible debate. I have a question next from
Through you, my apologies, Mr Mayor. I only raised these issues because they've been raised by other councillors. They were talking about financial prudence. They were talking about projections for next year.
It grows and it wanders off, and so I wasn't particularly picking on you, but I'm saying it's time that we just... Mr Filipina is the next speaker, and he's a stickler for things being done right. So we'll stick to questions only, please, Mr Filipina.
Yep, I know standing orders, Your Worship, so I know that it's part-time. So, tēnā koe te rangatira, tēnā koutou katoa to our staff, and tēnā koe, John. And the reason I'm leaving you last is because my questions relate to Standard & Poor's and Moody's. But the first question is to Peter. Peter, you mentioned that the depreciation in the policy that we have currently to 2028. And the reason I'm mentioning this, because you answered a particular question around the depreciation. Can you advise me that with the depreciation, is that a conversation can be had at the long-term plan, which starts about the 1st of July, that a conversation can happen around this governing body around changing that depreciation policy?
Yes, as with all policies, including the revenue and financing policy and the long-term plan, you can consider how you want to enact that.
Oh, thank you. John, questions to you around our debt to revenue ratio, but also Standard & Poor's and Moody's. Can you tell me what is our current headroom?
Through you, Chair, look, very roughly to our internal target of 270, there's about $1 billion of headroom, up to 290, which is our policy limit. There'll be about another $1 billion, ballpark.
And percentage-wise, in regards to how high we can go, what is the current position with Auckland Council? Is it 250, 235? Or?
Through you, Chair, the current level is about 250%. The work we've done with S&P and Moody's, we believe we can go to 290% and still maintain our AA rating. I put a big caveat over that, is that that's only looking at the debt to revenue. There are other factors which rating agencies take into account. That's around the quality of our financial management, whether our decisions are prudent and that sort of thing. So they'll look very closely at things like our operating gap and the measures we put in place to fund that, and how prudent and sustainable that is. So it's not just as simple as saying we can put debt up to 290% to maintain the rating. A lot of other factors we need to consider.
So will I be correct in saying as long as we have a plan to mitigate the debt that we do, that will be not an issue at this stage, even though we can go to 290 as long as there's a plan in place. Am I correct in saying that?
Through you, Chair, what the rating agencies will do, they'll look at the overall budget package. They would prefer less debt than more debt, and they would only expect us to use debt in a small amount as a short-term measure. Because to use debt as a medium or long-term measure is simply adding to the problem and kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, so 290%, and without losing the rating that we currently have. That's what I've heard you say. Can you tell me, with the 290%...
If I could just add to that, Councillor, sorry, I just wanted to bring it back to the funding of depreciation as well. My understanding of the conversation around 290 was the circumstances at the time, particularly COVID, and the understanding that we would be fully funding depreciation as well. We delayed it for 3 years, and that was very much then a stake in the ground of a commitment to getting back to that. So I think those two things have to work in tandem, rather than just being seen in differential terms.
Thank you for that, Peter, because I'm only mentioning it because John did, the 290%. So thank you for that. So John, you have further to say. I've got two more questions.
Just to clarify, just to be really clear on this, we can't blindly just go up to 290% and use debt in any way we think and expect to maintain the AA rating. There are a lot of other factors to take into account. So we cannot say that we can run debt up to 290% and we'll maintain the AA rating.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we take it up to 290, John. What I'm asked, and I've asked earlier as well, what I've asked is that how much can we take it up to? And you've said 290%. I've also, and you also mentioned, John, I just wanted to make sure that I clarify this. You also mentioned that we will not be losing a percentage of our current rating, but as long as we have a plan forward. So that's why I asked it. You were the one that said it. So look, my other question I have is that what is the highest that we have gone as an Auckland Council with our debt to revenue ratio as a percentage? What is the highest that we have gone to date since 2010?
Through you, Chair, I haven't got those exact numbers with me, but you know, on the outset of COVID, I think we were certainly in the 270s, maybe as high as 280.
What was the reaction from Standard & Poor's and also Moody's around the 270, 290?
Through you, Chair, again, they don't just look at that in isolation. When it came to COVID, they looked at our overall response to how we dealt with the gaps caused by the COVID revenue shortfalls. And in that situation, we had quite a balanced approach where we cut costs, we cut back on expenditure, we had sold some assets, and we used a modest amount of debt. And they would expect exactly the same approach to the budget gap we have now.
Cool. And last question, Your Worship. How strong is our credit rating now, John?
Through your Chair, it's AA and AA2 for Moody's, so it would be internationally recognised as a very strong credit rating.
Very strong. Thank you.
Councillor Dalton.
No, thank you. My questions were asked by Councillor Walker and Councillor Filipaina.
That might give me an opportunity to talk to the actual highest debt rating we've had, which is 264. So John mentioned the 270-ish space. I do believe we were projecting that to be the case through COVID, but we were slightly better that when the actuals come through at 264.
Yeah, thanks for the input, but the last comment I think was key for me, which is a very strong rating. Thank you.
Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if you could remind this governing body committee, how many $1 million is a 1% rate increase?
A 1% increase in general rates equates to about $20 million.
Okay, so we've had people in this debate advocate for a 0 rate increase next year, and this does stray into the LTP, but it's important to this. 15% rate increase then would be needing to find $300 million a year next year? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Hills, please.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. I just want to check on the numbers. So we are at 250 now without the shares, with holding our shares. We're at 250. And are you saying that 1 billion takes us up 20%? Is that right? Around that? Okay, so with you keep the shares in full, and there's another 570, I think, borrowed this year for capital, and then we've got potentially up to 3 billion with CRL, level crossings, and storm. So doesn't that take us well over 290?
Yeah, all those numbers obviously are very, very rough and subject to negotiations with government on a number of them. But yes, even with if those numbers, if we were not to sell and we were to sit at 250 and then incurred another couple of $1 billion of spend, then we'd be at risk.
So at the very least, with the 560 plus the CRL, you're looking at 270 definite, and then we haven't factored in the storm related costs and the potential buyouts.
Yes, that's correct. So the advice John's given is that there's about 2 billion of debt headroom. As we go through the LTP, we have to consider all of those things, the timing of when things occur, and revenue projections, and look at it as a whole. But you know, with the proposal, with the revised meal proposal of the sell down an extra billion less debt, that gives you 3 billion of headroom. Clearly, you're in a better position, have more flexibility with 3 billion of headroom than 2 billion of headroom.
Okay. Thank you. And just a question for Jim. Sorry, Councillor. Sorry, Jim. Just a question for Jim, and which you shouldn't, but put the debt headroom aside. If you fill the operations gap with more debt, so you have to find it again, and take the assumption, which is just an assumption, that we don't go past the rates again next year, that we're sitting here 7-8%. You'd already be looking for about 140 or more of savings again next year if councillors aren't willing to go above 8%. If you're looking at a 15.7% rates increase, like your options for staff and services again.
Well, I guess every 20 million is either 1% of rates or it comes out of expenses. So, you know, to balance the operating budget in one way or another, it would have to be funded either from rates increases or from an expense reduction.
I think that's why he doesn't want to be here. But
Mayor, not a point of order, but I don't think that was appropriate comment. But
have you finished your question? Thank you very much for that question. I have no further questions. Staff, I'll ask you to leave and we'll go into the debate section of this. Rightio, we're about to go into the debate over Councillor Fooley's amendment, and she gets the right to be first. Understanding rules, I can limit this to 3 each way, but I'd rather just urge you to be discreet. We have had a lot of debate about this already, and this is way down the track of months of debate about this. So, Councillor Fooley, are you paying attention? We're going to the debate and you're the first cab off the rank too. You done? Okay.
I think...
Thank you.
No, she's just...
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. When you have dug a $12.3 billion hole, why would you keep on digging? It's time to stop kicking the can down the road and deal with Auckland Council's debt and the associated massive daily interest charges on Aucklanders. Auckland's debt is costing Auckland ratepayers $1.5 million a day. Just think about it. Auckland Council's debt is costing Aucklanders a lotto win of $1.5 million a day each and every day throughout the year. The professional finance advice being given by the Chief Executive Officer, and I quote, increasing debt is a short-term answer that could make up the remainder of the year, or next year harder, and is not a prudent approach. The professional financial advice to all councillors goes further, where the Chief Financial Officer adds, and I quote, debt reduces headroom to deal with future shocks and is not a credible or a prudent approach to financial management. We have been told there are future shocks coming. We know at least $3 billion worth of borrowing will be required. That's the City Rail link, the storm damage, buying out red stickered properties and more. But there's others we don't even know about yet. This amendment potentially puts Aucklanders in risk of not being able to deal with another emergency. Taking on even more debt and ballooning out Auckland Council's debt even further, instead of being wise governors of Auckland and fixing Auckland Council, is not a prudent or the right thing to do. Taking on more debt is kicking the can down the road of fixing Auckland. Taking on more debt to deal with Auckland's overspending has been the approach by the majority of councillors under both Len Brown and Phil Goff administrations, and Aucklanders have had a gutsful of paying for it. It's time to fix Auckland and to get rate rises and debt under control. Instead of using debt as a last resort, debt is being used as a first resort. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. I am wholeheartedly in support of keeping residential rates below the rate of inflation. That's because Auckland is in a cost of living crisis and we need to avoid dipping further into Aucklanders' pockets. Equally, I'm keen not to further increase the massive amount of council debt. This is because debt attracts interest repayment costs, which also hits Aucklanders in the pockets because debt has to be repaid. Now is the time for bold and brave decisions to stop wastage and overspending, to get council back to core business and to get control over council-controlled organisations. The Mayor has bent over backwards to reach a compromise. His balanced budget should be supported. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you very much. That was a well-written speech, Councillor Sayers. I am going to speak in support of Councillor Foley's amendment, and I've been listening to all the questions around debt, and I hear the concerns around additional debt from councillors. We're talking about an additional 60 million on top of the Mayor's proposal, which is 80 million. I felt like 100 million. I felt like we're talking about $1 billion, and we're worried a lot about what's going to happen next year. Yet I've heard really clearly from Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Williamson, we're going to be taking a new approach to the long-term plan. Every year we do this. Every year has been difficult in more recent times, but we have the opportunity next year to really hone in on those costs. We are still in an unprecedented time. This is not a business as usual budget. Debt is there for us to use at this point in time, and I hear what councillors are saying about the rate increases next year being larger based on business as usual this year. We are saying business will not be as usual when we go through the long-term plan. We do need to reduce debt, and we need to do that properly. We need to do that with a strong evidence base. But we do need to get through this year. And I don't believe, and I have said it many times, that selling our shares in the airport at this point in time is the right way to solve a 325,000, I wish it was 325,000, 325 million gap. I believe that we can work through this. And we talk about the effect on rates on people, and I heard from councillors yesterday from wealthier wards than mine, but certainly you will have your pockets of deprivation where a rates increase will hurt. But if your pockets of deprivation were a simile to a pool table, then we're the pool table. Our communities are the ones that are sitting in the hardest deprivation. And they do own homes, and they do pay rates, and they have said that they would rather pay higher rates, and they've asked us to take on a bit more debt, 60 million, not $1 billion, to get us through these cuts and to retain the airport shares. I'll be supporting Councillor Foley in her amendment, and I look forward to being able to sit down and have a really good look under the bonnet. All of us looking under the bonnet instead of some of us looking under the bonnet. So we can all get the right information at the right time, at the same time, and get some collaboration going on around here as we build a budget for the next 10 years for the city. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor Simpson, please.
Councillor Foley, whaawhiti, thank you. You know, you've worked really hard on this, and I commend you for coming to the table with something that balances and not just saying no. So well done, well done. It takes a lot of work, and I really appreciate all the effort that you've put in to stand by what you believe in. So thank you. My issue is we have a proposal by the Mayor to reduce our debt by $1 billion. So, Councillor Dalton, we are talking about $1 billion. It's really hard for me to support a budget that keeps our debt and adds $60 million more rather than the Mayor's option, which lowers it by $1 billion. I also don't think that adding $60 million worth of debt to pay OPEX bills just so we can keep the airport shares, which may bring us in $40 million, is a sound financial decision. The other thing that concerns me about it is it risks a credit rating downgrade, which, councillors, we should be very proud of that we've kept, even in the toughest of times, because it reflects our financial management. So there is a lot I congratulate you for, councillor. Your rates option, you know, and your reducing of cuts, but actually how you pay for it is really the one that I'm struggling with. So again, I say thank you, well done, but I'm sorry, I just can't do it. I just don't think that looking at the financial options around debt, which is how we pay for stuff, is the breaking point for me. So I can't support it, I'm sorry, thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, you know, I'd like to add my thanks as well. I do appreciate that we're having this debate. It's a debate that we've needed to have because it's a debate that in the public, these are the questions that are on people's minds. And I know people have approached me about this all the time. I'm still getting texts right now as I'm talking. So I do appreciate you bring this to the table, but look, I have to say that I'm not going to support this. And if I did support this, I would feel irresponsible to my ward, irresponsible to Aucklanders and their future services. We have huge things coming down the pipeline. We've got the CRL, we've got storm-related costs to come, add in buyouts of people's homes that are flooding all the time and risking their lives. This is mainly West Auckland issues as well, those buyouts, I would suggest. I'd be letting down West Aucklanders if I put that in jeopardy, and we need the debt headroom for these kind of things. They're coming toward us and we know it. We know it. Look, the other thing is that we also need debt headroom to cover over the decades of underfunding that we have done for infrastructure in the city. Suburban Auckland has taken on all the housing. 12 years, Henderson Massey's been packing it in. And what investment have they got for that? Bugger all. One pool for 250,000 people in West Auckland. How are we going to pay for these things? We pay for these investments through debt, and we need that headroom for these investments. They'll be in trouble anyway. We need to fight for that in future years. We vote this through, I think that fight's already over. I don't want to go back to my ward and say, no Massey pool, I'm sorry. You know, the other thing that's come up is there's been some discussion around hooning in on our costs and our savings in future years. The previous budget, the budget that we went out in December, that I called the black budget yesterday, that talked about cuts to homeless funding. It talked about cuts to arts centres, things that Aucklanders value very, very much. And if we put this off and we're staring down the barrel of a 15% rate increase next year, those things will be back on the table and more. I'm telling you now. So come on, guys. Let's treat this financial issue that we have as a 3-year problem, and let's take a significant step this year to solving it so that we can get back to investing in things like pools, get back to investing in things that will serve the people of Auckland. Thank you, Mayor.
Very much for that. Councillor Watson, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And let's be very clear at the outset here that the proposal put up by Councillors Foley and Filipina is a genuine alternative. It presents a balanced budget that has been recognised. It enables us to retain ownership of all the shares. It restores the funding to local board. It keeps rates at the level the Mayor first went out at. Hope the Ratepayers Alliance are keeping check of that. The trade-off is short-term debt. At the centre of this, the centrepiece of this motion and any motions or amendments coming back still remains the sale of the airport shares. That is really a lazy option out, as councillors were told by specialists earlier in the week, and it will just enable to watch the debt climbing right back up again. And indeed, that's already what's predicted in the council investor update. We have new debt approaching nearly $1 billion over the next couple of years, and that's not accounting the cost of refinance debt. So straight onto the debt escalator, at the same time as the asset you have sold grows in value. That's really the worst of both worlds. The partial sale option that will be coming up later is really a cop-out. We've seen how this plays out with the diversified assets portfolio. A first cut merely laying the ground for the full disposal. It might seem like a compromise, and compromise is a nice sounding word, but it's not. It's a backdoor to a full sale. I quoted exactly the details yesterday, how that went down previously and how it will go down here. First up, $335 million fund, a smaller version of the airport shares, 100 million gone straight away. Within 13 months, the balance 240 odd gone as well. But councillors who've been around here, they know that. People have been sitting around here, they know that. They also know what happened to Auckland Council Investments Limited, an organisation with considerable commercial and investment expertise, plenty of financial literacy there. Probably a little too much for their own good. They consistently posted record profits and returns to council, but their functioned assets again speedily transferred to the council group as councillors were reassured the merits of the disestablishment rely on the preservation of the commercial return from AIAL and Ports of Auckland. I don't see too much of that commercial return being preserved today. Even as recently as the last term of council under Phil Goff, there was another attempt to address this or advance this airport sale. That was, interestingly enough, summarily dismissed by the Mayor at that time, and Mr Goff wasn't exactly a man averse to selling off public assets over his career, but even he drew the line at the airport shares, emphatically and expeditiously dismissing this proposal, along with its proponents, on the basis that there was no shortage of eager buyers who would be lining up to buy the shares, and in those circumstances, why would you consider any sort of sale? And what made Mr Goff say that? Well, quite simply, $2.4 billion in shareholder returns over a 7-year period. After 3 years of the pandemic, those returns sat at 1.7, climbing to 2.19, currently sitting at 2.346. When we think of the numbers that are getting tossed around, that's a 586 million increase in just since last year. Similarly, the dividend payments suspended, but due to return. 42 this year, 52, and increasing exponentially after that. As to the value of those shares, there's really no doubt about them. Listen to what the brokers say. AAI remains a rare, high-quality infrastructure business. Another, AAI represents one of the world's most strategic airport assets, and the outlook has improved as international borders have now been opened. And the canny investors that we know are sitting there, they're lining up, not up to help Auckland Council out. They know that good returns are around the corner, and in fact, on an exponential level, once that passenger numbers sitting at 80% recover fully. So, quite simply then, a decision over the sale of the shares, as Mr Crawford said, is premature. Nothing has changed, partial or full. Nothing changes that. And councillors have been told that. Our most valuable asset should be the last resort, as other people have said. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And there's enough councillors around there who should be paying attention to that. The cost, the spirited argument about learning from the past is not particularly evident in just ensuring the status quo remains. It is only this alternative that presents a different way forward, not the same old tried and disproven ways of the past that some speakers have already referred to today. So I will be supporting this amendment, and I will be supporting it enthusiastically.
Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Hopefully I can have something come up on the screen in a minute. There's a wonderful old...
Can I have some clarification on the reference to these notes? Sorry, my audio's not going. Is this within the standing orders in a speaking turn to a motion to have an audio visual? Otherwise I'll be presenting some Emerson cartoons.
Have you got them ready?
I think it's up to my discretion. Let's see what's on them.
Well, no, and that's not the question. The question is it within the standing orders to refer to an audio-visual presentation?
Yes, it is within my description. I've just asked the standing order policeman. Okay.
So it's you're using your discretion as opposed to it being provided for in the standing orders, Chair.
Provided for me to use my discretion, which presumably you must have thought about.
Further point of order, I'd ask why this wasn't offered as an opportunity to all members around the table.
Agreed.
It was up to him.
I'm happy to move in support of Mr Williamson.
If it upsets everybody, I'm sure Councillor Williamson can survive without it, but it is within my discretion to have that. And if it aids the thing, we'll see. I don't know what's in this any more than anybody else does.
My understanding is the precedent was yesterday.
Only 2 slides, and it's actually just information, that's all.
I've got a compromise, Mr Mayor. Perhaps if Councillor Williamson wants to email it around to us, that'd be...
I'd prefer to see it on the screen. It's a lot easier. It's big print.
Well, so far I have speakers from both sides of this argument who are okay about it, and speakers from both sides of the argument who aren't. So I think we'll let it up there, and we'll see how we go.
Okay.
But
close your eyes.
Excuse me, Mayor. Sorry, sort of maybe it's not a point of order, but it does, I just want to say, it does set a strange precedent to, I've never seen this before, and I think there's a risk that 20 of us bring presentations every time, and that's not something we've discussed, so I find it very strange, but. Yeah.
Well, it is unusual, but then again, quite a lot of the debate we've had is unusual, so, and I'm prepared to listen. So, and as I say, there are people on both sides of the vote here who seem to be okay about it, so, and if you don't, you can always look away.
So, Your Worship, just to confirm, your ruling is that they will be allowed?
At this stage, I have the discretion to allow it. I've asked around the room, and there are people from both sides of the argument who don't seem to be upset by it. So, in the interests of a fairness, there are people on both sides.
So now that I'm going to do a presentation when I speak, where do I send that presentation to? To Sandra? I mean, I got no problems. I'll do a presentation during the break, and then I'll send it to Sandra, so then that can be up there. Thank you, Your Worship. Good ruling.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're going to do it for one, we must do it for all. But I may have opened a can of worms. We'll see how well we go with this one. If everyone behaves sensibly about this, we'll allow it in the future. But if they're all going to use it as point scoring, we won't. Let's take a big risk. I have no idea what's in these things, just to make sure you're not thinking I'm prejudging. But let's see how this goes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a wonderful old Latin saying, which is contra vera nihil obstat, which is against fact, there is no argument. So I wanted to put these numbers up for you now, if I can. I don't want you to read that because I've got it in a graphical form, but these are figures from the council showing what's happened to our rates and what has happened to CPI. And if I turn it to the graphical form, you will be able to see that this first graph, if it moves, there we go. Oops, I need to go back to the third one if we could, Sandra. Okay, I'll take it through. The remote's not. Okay, the first graph is what's happened to rates, and you can see that that has run on an index basis from the 1 since this council was formed up to around 1600. The second graph is what's happened to CPI over that time, running to an index of about 1300. The reason I'm putting that up there is to make every councillor here aware that rates have run significantly ahead of CPI year on year on year, and I find that unconscionable. I've heard councillors sitting around this table saying they have got constituents who are having to make tough decisions about whether they heat their house or pay for food on the table. And I know there are people out there like that in all wards, not just the southern wards. And I know people who are on fixed incomes who cannot keep having their rates just pushed up and up. And that graph shows you that there is no argument about, oh, well, just this time, just this year, we should be pushing rates up. It's happened year on year on year, and now you've had a doubling from a 60% increase in rates over a 30% CPI from those numbers. That's why I wanted that graph put up, because I cannot be even slightly comfortable with people wanting to shove rates up again just this year above CPI, because we've done it every other year, and now it's all right just for one more year. And the other thing, I don't know what exists, because I don't know the meaning, but I've heard it used by so many people, short-term debt. Because I don't think this council knows what short-term debt is. I would have I only slapped that together in the last couple of minutes, but I'd love to have put a graph of our debt. It's just going up all the time, year on year on year. So if it was short-term, it would have gone up and then gone right back down again. But it didn't. And I'm making a plea to every one of you who are concerned about people in your wards who are on fixed incomes, who you say they can't even afford to put food on the table, or the decisions they're having to make to try and keep afloat. And families who couldn't afford $3 to an event centre, I heard. They haven't got that $3 to send their kids to one of those things. They haven't got it, but we're prepared to rank their rates up significantly again, as we have done year on year. So my plea is to you, whatever your solutions be, I'll be voting against this amendment, but whatever your solutions are, please look towards the bottom box, the bottom right-hand box of your calculator that you've got, and please make sure that that red arrow of rates both this year and future years is not keeping that graph carrying on where we go above inflation year on year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.